assuming you know it's appropriate for you to switch on your camera right now. If you're driving, don't switch on your camera. And if you don't want to switch on your camera, but you still want to communicate, I would love you to type in the chat. I'm afraid English or Irish are the only languages I will understand if you type in the chat. So please stick to one of those. And if you have questions throughout, I don't mind you asking them. But some questions I'll answer straight away, and longer questions I'll answer at the end if that's okay. All right. So, with those house rules, thank you for the introduction. I don't usually get introductions, but I appreciate when I do get them. As you heard, I'm Stephen Howell, and I'm Irish and I live in Ireland, but I work for a big tech company, a huge tech company that many people haven't heard of, because everyone's heard of Amazon, this big tech company, and you can buy stuff on the Amazon website and they'll ship it to your house, and you've heard of that. And people have heard of Amazon Prime. You can watch television and TV shows, Jack Reacher and Lord of the Rings and all these things. But when you say Amazon Web Services, if you're a computing person, if you're a techie, you might have heard of it. But it's not obvious to people who aren't in this world. What is that? So it's great to be able to speak to students and tell them something that they may be aware of, but not really familiar with the depth of it. And unfortunately, it's a huge, huge subject. So you'd have to invite me here for a month to get through all of it. So we're only going to do a little taste of it today. But I'm going to start off with a history lesson. Now, that sounds very boring, but don't leave just yet, okay? So when I say history lesson, it's really not the history of the cloud, but it's the history of me. Because as you can tell, I have a white beard. So that means I'm very, very old, okay? And, when I studied computing, like some of you are studying it now, we didn't even call it that. It was so long ago that we were still inventing a lot of the things that you are now studying. So, you know, the old joke, it was easier to do history when your parents went to school because they hadn't invented that much of it. Well, it's the same with computing. It was easier when I went to university because we were still inventing things. And I was in university the year the internet came to my country. So I was a first year student when you could get access to the internet, and only universities had access to it. It was so new. So imagine growing up in a time when there was no mobile phones, there was no internet. It sounds like I grew up in the 1700s, but I actually am only in my 40s. So it wasn't that long ago. So all of these changes that I'm going to be talking about today have happened in my working lifetime. And as an example, when I started working, a big thing that we did was write CRUD applications. Now that sounds like I'm mispronouncing crude, okay, but it's CRUD, and I'll just type it in the chat there. So a lot of the first jobs you got as a programmer was writing a computer program, what we nowadays call an app, but back then we called an application. And it ran on your computer, and it probably only ran on one computer. And there was a database, and that database held information. And we would say, you create records, you read records, you update them, and you delete them, CRUD. Now, over time, that whole model had to change because eventually companies started saying the database needs to be synchronized across all of my workers. And when I was 17, 18, I sold my first software to a little company, and the company actually still exists. It was called Sensor Tech, and they were near where I lived because I was young. I couldn't drive a car, I didn't have a car. And I was able to go there and I wrote the software on a computer that they bought just for the software. So I didn't have my own laptop. Laptops did exist, but I had never seen one. So I wrote the software on the computer they had, and it was an old Dell, probably a big gray box with a big tick monitor on top. You may never have seen a CRT monitor, but just imagine the old style televisions that you may have seen when you were younger. They're not thin and flat, they were very, very, very wide. And for me to be able to go and write that software, and let me just rearrange my screen because I'm going to share my screen in a minute. I just have to find where everything's gone. Sorry, Zoom has moved all my windows around on my monitor, so I have to find where it went. There we go. No, where's he gone? There we go. Okay, I've lost my Zoom window. There we go. I found it again. So I wrote the software and I wrote it in Java version 1. So that'll show really how old I am. Java came out in 1995. So I wrote this around 1997. So I wrote the software and it talked to a database. Now, where was that database? It was on the computer. Did it not talk to a server? Well, it did, but that computer was the server and it was also the client. So you've heard of a client server model. Well, in my case, it was all on that one computer. Backup involved putting a floppy disk in the computer, and they weren't actually floppy, these disks, but you put them in and it could back up the entire database by copying it onto a disk. Not a great backup strategy. Now, we didn't have the cloud, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have any of those things, but I wrote the software and I was a bit of a nerd. Okay, I'm still a big nerd, but back then I loved Star Wars. So I named all my projects in the source code after different Star Wars characters. And I called that Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, if you've never heard of Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's okay, but you should go watch Star Wars and learn. But after that, I went off to university. And while I was at university, many things changed. The cloud did not exist. The cloud did not exist when I was in university, but the ideas behind it were beginning to emerge. So I was a young working developer. I worked for IBM as a software engineer, and I was writing C++. And a large part of our work was going from legacy systems to modern systems. Now, legacy systems would be old banking mainframes. And these banking mainframes, they didn't sound cool, but they ran the whole world's banking and financial systems. There's a lot of money in that, guys, if you and girls, if you get the chance to do it. So you would be writing CRUD software, create financial records, read financial records, update them, delete them. And if you made a mistake, you could delete €1 billion off someone's bank account. That would be very worrying. Hopefully, I never did that. But everyone was working on these systems, and the need to synchronize the data is incredibly important. Why? Well, imagine I walked into a bank and the bank's data is not synchronized with the other banks, and I take out all of my money, and they somehow can't tell the other banks that I've taken out all of my money. And then I quickly go over to the other banks and I take out all of my money, and they don't know that I've actually done that at every single bank until they reconcile the accounts the next day. And they realize, wait a minute, Stephen's actually emptied his bank account 10 times when he can only do it once. So in order to stop that happening, banks would synchronize their data. And they needed better networking and better internet. And every business wanted to do this. So over time, when we wrote software, we had to think not just it's running on this computer, but it's going to talk to other computers. We had to think about synchronization and parallel algorithms, and making sure that we didn't get our data into a bad state where we're not sure if we've written it yet or not. Am I in the middle of updating a record when someone else updates it and breaks everything? Now, all of these concepts just made your education harder. I didn't have to worry about it when I was doing my exams, but suddenly as a developer, I needed to worry about it. And then the cloud came along. And the cloud at first was sort of a miniature version of the world we had. You take your existing server, which could be on your desktop, and you just what we call lift and shift. You take the whole thing, you wrap it up, and you put it on someone else's computer. You say, well, why bother? Why not keep it on your own computer? Well, cloud computing gave us the ability to say, what if we didn't have to buy, set up, and maintain all of our own infrastructure, our hardware, our networks, the switches, the routers, all of that stuff? What if that boring stuff we just gave to someone else to handle, We'll pay them to do that. And we don't have to worry about depreciation costs. We'll only pay for what we use. So instead of, remember when I was 17, the company said, Stephen, will you write a database for us? And they bought me a Dell, and it was a Dell Optiplex something, and it was sitting there on their desk. Well, that computer, 6 months after they bought it, was worth half the money. And then a year later, it was worth a quarter of the money. And it would depreciate very quickly. Also, the bits would break down. Imagine getting a hard drive from 1997 and wondering would it still work? I mean, it might, but it probably wouldn't. It will have dried up and broken and the oil is gone. So you're not getting any data off that hard drive. So over time, it became easier to say, I'd rather not worry about depreciation of my hardware and wear and tear and replacing. I just want to pay someone else to do that. I want to focus on the bit I'm interested in, which is writing the software. Now, does that mean I forget about things like security and all that? Absolutely not. There's a shared responsibility here. I have to make sure I write my software securely. But I no longer worry about, when I was a software engineer, it wasn't just, do I have to write the code? It was, do I have to write the code? Yes. Do I have to know how to be a database administrator? Yes. Do I have to know how to secure my code? Oh, yes. Do I have to know how to secure the operating system? Yeah, I'm afraid so. Do I have to know how to secure my network? Yeah. Do I have to know how to troubleshoot network? No. All of these things was not what my goal and my focus was. I was a software engineer. I wanted to write code. Instead, I'm dealing with all of this other stuff that nowadays we might call DevOps, but back then was a huge part of your daily job as a software engineer. And that's why terms like full stack are very confusing for old folks like me. So when I talk to a developer of my generation, full stack meant I can write an operating system all the way to a web browser. Nowadays, full stack means I can do front end and back end. But we meant we could implement and code the front end and back end. Whereas others now mean it as well. I know how to design a web page, and I know how to make it talk to a web server. Now, they're very important skills, but it's a different view of what full stack means. Now, so at first, the cloud, as we would call it, Amazon Web Services, was effectively offering servers or virtual servers that you could replace your physical servers with, and you were pushing onto them the onus, the responsibility to maintain them and keep them working properly and securely. And a lot of businesses like this because it was cheaper and they weren't dealing with depreciation. And if a hard drive fails, it's not their problem. It's the cloud's problem. They'll do it and fix it, and we don't have to worry about it. Now, the big challenge was that very few software engineers understood working with the cloud. And this brings us to our first big point, okay, why I'm telling you this history lesson. I was a software engineer in IBM. The cloud didn't exist. I decide I'm going to leave being a software engineer, okay? I didn't rage quit. I decided I was going to change my career. And I went to become a university lecturer. And I taught in university for over a decade. And in that time, I was teaching software development, application development, databases, all the traditional things. But I saw that the industry had changed. And I saw that it was no longer enough to teach people how to write software on their computer, which we had been doing as lecturers since the 1960s. It had changed. Now we had to teach how to write software that would run in the cloud. Now, at the time, there was only really 3 public clouds, but there was lots of smaller clouds. So teaching students was tricky because very few of them were exposed to a cloud at any point. And I'll give you an example. My son, Jack, he's 20 now, but when he was a teenager in school, he had to do work placement. Now, when I was a teenager and I did work placement, it was, doing very different work. I worked in factories, I worked on farms, but my son, Jack, could code. He could write software. So I sent him to the little company that I had worked for many years ago called SensorTech. Now, to give you a difference, we're both the same age roughly, but Jack has grown up being able to code, and Jack has grown up with the internet and the cloud. Whereas I grew up, there was no internet, there was no cloud. So when I wrote software, it ran on the computer only. And when they write software, it runs, or when Jack writes software, he assumed it would run locally. Now, what happened? Well, of course, as you can imagine, the little company that I'd written the software for, remember I told you about the software I wrote at the beginning? They brought Jack over and showed him this old computer, an ancient computer, a Dell with a really thick monitor and grey. And they said, Jack, this is our computer. We have just bought it on eBay. And Jack is very direct. And he said, well, you paid too much then. And they said, no, Jack, we bought this antique because we have software which runs our database. And it was written 20 years ago. And we're afraid, 30 years ago, we're afraid to update it because if we change the computer, the software might stop working. So we keep buying the same computer on eBay so the software will keep working. And think about this, folks. They're not software people. They're a company that makes thermometers, so they're hardware people, food thermometers to make sure food is safe. If you're cooking food, use the thermometer. It tells you the food is cooked enough. I don't know how it works, but that's what they do. But they did not know what would happen if they updated the computer. The software might stop working. So here's a funny thing that happened. They showed Jack the computer and they didn't tell him that his dad had written the software many years ago. And they said, Jack, could you update the source code so this database could run online? Is that possible? So Jack opened it up and he looked through it and he saw that it was old Java. And he saw the name of the program was Obi-Wan Kenobi. So he came home and he asked me, he said, I was looking at an old code they have in SensorTech today, and there was a program called Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I said, Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan? That's a name I haven't heard in a long time, a long, long time. Imagine finding your code from 30 years ago and it's still being used and still being run. That's terrifying to me as a programmer. Absolutely terrifying. Because it's like stuck in amber. They're afraid to change anything because if they change it, it might stop working and they rely on it. In modern times, if they came to me and said, could you write that program? A modern cloud-first software engineer would take the following approach. They would say, we will design this program so that this is an application that can be accessed via a web browser. It will be running on a cloud server. It might be serverless so that there's very little constantly running server. When they make a request, a database service will return the data they need. When they make an update, a database service will do that. And we'll hide it all behind a secure front end that decides who's allowed to make what changes where and when. And they would design it in that mode from the start. It's very hard to go from the old style, only works on my computer, to a cloud-enabled application. And that's why the second point I want to talk about is important. Now, some of you are studying tech courses and some of you aren't, and that's okay. But if you're studying a tech course and you're in a university that has an AWS academy, you will have an opportunity to learn a lot about the cloud. And that will really help you in your future career. If you're not lucky enough to be in a course that does an AWS academy, not all courses do, well then, if you're going to work in tech, I think it is very hard nowadays to convince someone to hire you to write software if you can't show that you have an understanding of the cloud. And in order to get an understanding of the cloud, it's hard. It's not something you do overnight. Some people say, oh, I have to get lots of certifications. Certifications are great, but that's not actually the solution to having an understanding of the cloud. Certifications are good if you want to look good on your CV or your resume, Not sure in India whether you call it a CV or a resume, but anyway, I say CV. So if you want your CV to look good, you want to stick lots of certifications and exams and a master's. And yeah, that's great. But there's a difference between the certification and the exam and the experience of actually building something that runs on the cloud. So the cloud clubs, including the cloud club event that you're talking or that I'm talking to you here, is critical because there are so many um, so many different complex services that exist that students very quickly are overwhelmed when they look at the cloud. It's like there's far too much here. Everything is complex, lots of options, everything's expensive. And I'm going to start with the expense aspect, okay? So cloud services make lots of money for the companies that offer them because businesses use them. And I'm going to assume that you're not a big multinational business with lots of money. I'm going to assume you're like me, you're a student, you don't want to spend lots of money. So, how do you avoid being hit with big charges? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of ways. The first way is join a cloud club because they will occasionally get swag and perks, including access to cloud services. Certain ones, there's limitations, but that is a start. The second issue is there is free access to certain cloud services, but they require you to put in a credit or debit card, which we don't recommend for students because you could get a bill. We don't want you to get a bill. So the most important way and the guaranteed absolutely free way is to attend a hosted camp or workshop with your cloud club. Now, I don't know if your club is planning on organizing them, but I think they are. I hope they are. And a camp is, it could be 2 hours, 3 hours. You know, it's a set amount of time. It's up to the club to decide. There are prerequisites, so you can't go in knowing nothing. You might have to know how to code already or a certain level of it. But the idea is that it gives you a set lesson, which is hands-on, it's practical. You complete it, and it's completely covered in cost by us. There is absolutely no charge to you. You're creating real cloud services, but we pay for all of them. Now, it is time limited. At the end of the camp, the account goes away. You don't get to keep the account, I'm afraid, because then it'd be infinite money and I'd be in trouble. But instead, you say at the end of 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is, okay, I've gotten to create this thing. I understand how it works. And I have earned, you earn a virtual badge. But more importantly, you can put in your CV, completed this camp. It's a 3 hour camp where I built this practical solution. Now, I think that's better than a hackathon. Like, I like hackathons, but hackathons are very competitive. A lot of people go to hackathons who can't code and they say, well, I'm the ideas person. And all the coders are sitting there saying, well, we don't really need an ideas person right now. We need to finish the hackathon. And then the ideas person feels bad because they can't contribute. I don't want anyone feeling bad at a hackathon. So instead, what I'd like to see is students who want a hands-on practical experience to apply to do camps. And that way I can give you a free account for the duration of the camp that costs you nothing, but actually lets you create real AWS services without getting the bill at the end. Now, finally, if you're lucky enough to be in an AWS Academy, you will get an account from them to complete their courses. And their courses are excellent, but I know not everyone may be on a university program where they can do that. Okay, so that's the money out of the way. The next thing is the skills. Okay, so if you're doing a thesis or capstone project or a final year project or a master's thesis, often you will be told at the end you have to host it somewhere. And I always say, there's 3 different ways to decide where to host your projects or services to use. The first one is if your lecturer or professor or tutor or mentor, whatever word you use, your advisor, says that it has to use a particular cloud service, use that one. Okay? Don't annoy your professors ever. The second one I would say is if you're told you can use any one you like, use the one that you have access to cheaply that you understand. So in this case, if you attend the cloud club, you'll learn how to use AWS and you'll see the cheapest way to access it. And then the third one is, if you're worried that there might be a better way or a more efficient way or a cheaper way, you can always reach out to your cloud club and to folks like us. There's loads of different ways you can communicate with us online. We have community.aws, which is our big community site. And by joining a club, you can ask those questions. You can be part of that community. And community is a huge thing at AWS. I mean, I've worked in lots of other tech companies, and I've never seen a community program quite like this. It's incredible. And I'm not just talking about student communities, because they're new. That's something my team are setting up. I'm talking about the wider communities, the professionals already working. They're very active in building communities around AWS, which is really cool to see. Now, I've spoken now for a while. I'd like to do a little demo now, if that's okay. Is it okay if I do a demo?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully Zoom will let me do that. If not, it'll be a very short demo. But before I go into the demo, I'm going to tell you what the demo is. Okay, so I'd like to demo using cloud services where I'm doing some machine learning, where I don't have access to a machine learning model or a fast GPU to run the model. So I'm going to use the cloud to do the work for me. Okay, and I think that would be interesting to people. I hope so anyway. Before I do that, I hope you didn't mind my history lesson about why cloud. Are there any questions from people before I jump into a demo? And I'll start the demo up while I'm waiting to see are there any questions. Everyone's very quiet so far, but someone did say, "May the force be with us," and I really appreciate that person. If I had a prize for not for Vikram, for Ritwick, I would give you the prize, but I don't have a prize, Ritwick, but a virtual high five to you. So let me just jump over here. And oh wow, I have a lot of projects. I have to open a folder. So I'm just seeing, are there any questions? No questions at all. I've put everyone to sleep, Indranil, already. Everyone's just gently snoring away.
Not at all, Stephen.
No,
It was
very
the most
interesting.
interesting history lesson.
Right.
Virtual high
Sorry.
five from my side as well.
Sorry about the history lesson. Right. So I'm just loading up my client here. I'm going to change my color scheme so it's easy for you guys to see. And then I'm going to load up my web browser. Where's my web browser gone? It's here somewhere.
I can see one's pricing related questions, Stephen. So can we do in future, can we do some pricing related sessions?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
How to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've two things to say about pricing before I go into the demo. One is it's important to learn how to estimate the expected cost of something you're going to do. Imagine that cloud services are a bit like switching on different appliances in your house. They all cost electricity, and electricity costs money. Well, cloud services are a bit like that. You can switch on lots of them, and then if you walk out of the room and leave everything running, even though you're not using it. Now, if you ring up the electricity company and say, "Why is my bill so high?" And they say, "Well, we don't know. Did you leave something running?" And you say, "Yes, I left all of my televisions, my microwave, my oven. I left everything running 24/7. And they said, "Well, were you watching television and cooking?" And you're like, "No, I just switched them on. I went on holidays." They would say, "Well, why didn't you switch them off? You have to pay for electricity you use, even if you weren't in the room when you were using it." So often you will get that sort of feeling from, providers of subscription services. It's like if you ring up Netflix and Disney Plus and say, "Hey, I know I subscribed, but I didn't watch anything. Can I have my money back?" You know what they'll say. So cloud services aren't a subscription service like you pay a certain amount every month whether you use it or not. You pay for usage. So if my virtual machine is switched on for 5 minutes, I've got to pay for 5 minutes. However, some services cost money after they're created, whether they're in use or not. So for example, storage. If you upload a load of data to an S3 bucket and say, I'm just putting it there. I'm not using it. We'll say, well, why don't you put it into cold storage? Because, you know, you don't need it every day. You say, oh, no, no, I might need it. So I want it ready to go anytime. We say, well, okay, but we pay charging you for that. Or you can put it into cold storage where it takes a few seconds to get it. And you might say, actually, that's okay because it's a lot less money. So you're paying because you've created it and you're using it, even if you're not actively looking at the data. It's there for when you need it. Now, it's a small amount of money, but I always say to people who say that, well, a small amount of money to you might be a lot of money to me. So someone says, oh, it's only a few cents. Yeah, in America, a few cents is very small, but in some countries, that's a lot of money. So you have to, you know, be relative about this. Just because it looks like a small amount of money, it adds up over time. So you can imagine that if you say, well, a small energy saving light bulb doesn't take up much money. That's true. It might only take up 1 cent a day. But if you leave it running for a year and then 10 years and then 20 years, and you look at how much it cost you over that time, you'll wish you'd switched it off when you weren't using it. And it's, you know, it's amazing when you look at the wastage out there. There are people who spin up a load of virtual machines. You say, wow, they must be going to do something amazing. And they're like, oh, no, I was just playing with it and then I forgot about it. Now, because it's not actively slapping them all the time, they forget about it easily. So instead, I would say, one, learn how to estimate cost. Two, really, really, really be strict with yourself in switching off things that you don't need and are not using. And I do that every single week. And if I was paying the bill myself, I do that every single day. But you know, you have to decide what's the right cadence for you. If I was a student and I've only got a limited amount of money, I check that every day. And we give you a thing called a cost explorer and a budget calculator that helps you figure out where am I spending my money. And my favorite one is there's an AWS resource explorer that will literally show you everything you've set up in your account everywhere. And I actually have a blog post about that. And it will say, look, you are creating all these things and then forgetting about them. You know, do you need them? And you'd be surprised. You go, actually, I don't need all of them. And you can delete them. Now, there's a few questions I'm going to answer before I do the demo. Whoa. So I nearly fell over there. Shivam. Okay, Shivam, in November 2022, I got AWS Cloud Practitioner certified. Congratulations. And after that, I didn't make any progress towards associate level certification. So rather than, there's no short answer to that. However, I do have a colleague who is amazing, and he is a trainer in AWS, and he writes content, and he's from, I think he's from India originally, and he has several books on how to pass the exams and how to study for them. And he's really impressive. And I'm going to send your cloud captain his name and a link to his books at the end. I think his book might be in the captain's swag. I'm not sure if we still have any, but I highly recommend his books. I'm just looking to see if I put them on my bookshelves over there. I've 3,000 books over here, so I can't exactly see where it is. I have too many books, folks. I think my dad's main memory of me growing up is him putting up bookshelves and saying, you can't have read all these books. I don't see his book. I know it's on the shelves there somewhere, but I've just too many books, so I don't see it. But I'm going to get his name for you. I would say, Shivam, get his books if he has one on the next thing you want to do. But in terms of general, apart from read the book, so every exam has a PDF on our Skill Builder website that tells you exactly what to do in terms of what's covered. Skill Builder, it is expensive, but you can get a free trial. And if you sign up for the free trial, you can see if the resources will be useful to you. Remember to cancel it if you're not using it. Again, everything costs money. Cancel it if you're not using it. And there's some free courses on Skill Builder, which you can get with any email that you sign up with. So that may be all you need. The other thing I would say is the most effective way for me personally to pass exams like these is not by reading books, it's by practicing. So if I go into an exam and I haven't done the thing, no amount of reading a book will help me. That's like me going into a piano examination and I read a book about piano, but I still can't play. So, practice, they say practice makes perfect. I would say for me personally, practice is the only thing. Now, sorry, folks, let me just see what the next question is. Ravi, how to deploy portfolio projects? Very good question. So for Python or Node, what are the cheapest options? So I'm going to sound sacrilegious here and say, don't host them on any provider that is something that you only have a student account for. So as an example, let's say you have an AWS student account and you deploy all these projects and you're giving the URL on your CV, and then you finish being a student, you graduate, and that account is going to disappear. Or you won't be able to log in because you no longer have access to the email. And then you're saying, oh, I need to get access to my stuff. I'll need to reach out to Steve in AWS and I won't be able to do anything. So instead, make sure it's an account that you own independent of the university. I know you're a student, but just you need to have ownership of it. And then if you go out, you'll see that there are services that are very cheap that will let you host it with a fixed cost. Loads of clouds out there offer Python and Node backends. Now we do, and ours is effectively free if you're doing the amount of traffic that you're talking about. It'll be very cheap. There is a catch though. If your app goes viral and everyone in the world, it's posted on, I don't know, Reddit and Hacker News, and everyone goes to see your amazing portfolio website. Well, you know what happens then? You get this big bill from me, and you don't want to get that big bill. So instead, you can host it nearly for cheap or free on AWS. The free tier is dedicated nearly to hosting portfolio projects, as long as you watch and monitor your costs, especially when it's your credit card or debit card that's in there. You don't want to be hit with that bill. Now, so Divyanshu, I'm probably butchered your name. I'm sorry if I did, but I've never met a Divyanshu before. So the cloud does store data, but that's actually, to me, the least interesting and important part of the cloud. Okay. So as an example, there are usually 3 levels of thinking about the cloud. Infrastructure, like the cloud is just servers, networks, and data. Okay. And that's a good way to think about it when you're a beginner. Imagine the computer on your desk. If I told you everything it can do, only faster, and you access it through a web browser, a lot of people would say, well, okay, not a big deal, but fine. If I told you the next level is, if you're a developer, being able to have databases and functions, in other words, things that do things for you, which require powerful computers, but you don't have to worry about that because you push it to someone else's powerful computer, then that becomes interesting. And then finally, it's making everything available as a service. So as a programmer, I'm going to demonstrate that now in a second. Let me just make sure that I've set this up right for the demo. I'm going to share my screen now in 1 second. But first I need to click this button. And that gives me a very good demo for you guys, I hope. So let me just share my screen. So to answer your question, here's an example. As soon as I figured out how to share my screen in Zoom. Now, now share screen. So here we go, share. I'm going to share the whole window. I think so, if I could just find it. Screen. There we go. There we go. Right. So I can no longer see the chat, of course, when I do this. Sorry about that, folks. But I just going to show you an example. So here's an app I've been given, but it doesn't work, okay? And in this app, I can click on different images, and someone has paid me to write a program which analyzes the images and tells them what's in it. Now, the problem here is I want to be able to click detect labels and for it to say things like mountains and bus, and what's that, a bear. But the problem I have is, of course, it doesn't work. That's my task to make it work. Now, I'm going to show you code now. And I know most people doing demos don't show code. And if you've never written code and this makes you queasy or terrified or makes you want to cry, I'm sorry, okay? I'm not trying to scare you with code. But if you are a coder, you like this. If you're not a coder, stick with us. It'll only take a minute. So I'm going to move my code up here to show you. Usually I don't have my code this color, but I do here because I hear it's easier for you guys to see on the screen. So I have some nice code here. I want to show you the code. So in my code, I am calling a thing called a recognition client. And a recognition client is special service which is offered by AWS that will recognize things in an image. Now, of course, I need to send it the image, and I send it the image by converting the data into a format that it can read. And then I specify how many labels I want, 10, and how confident it should be, 80% confident that that label is in the image. And then I send it off, and you can actually see how I send it off here. I create my query, I send it off to the client, and if I get the data back, I return it back to my app. Now that code will only work if I am connected to the cloud, and this bit here is the bit that connects me to the cloud. And as you can see, I have to have an access key and a secret access key, which is kind of like my username and password to access the cloud services. So I'm now going to show you how I get that data. So I have a special file over here, and it has the secret codes, but these are old ones. They're out of date. So I'm going to show you how I get them. Now, to do that, I need my web browser. So I'm just going to open up here on my other screen. I'm going to bring it up to show you in 1 second. And here we go. So this is my cloud account, and this is my work cloud account. I have lots of them. I'm going to switch it here to US North Virginia. And I need to tell it what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to create a new user. And this user is, I need to give it a name. So I'm going to, you can see I've got different users already. So I hit create user. I'm going to call this the recognition user. So rec user. Ooh, I can't spell. Okay, I'll zoom in there. Hit next. I'm going to attach some policies to it. And those policies are recognition. So we'll give it full access. Okay. And I hit next. Oh, actually, I'm going to, no, I think I have enough time. I think I've only enough time to show one thing. So I'm just going to do that. Okay. So if I go into my rec user now and go to security credentials and hit create access key, we'll get the things we were talking about earlier on. And I hit create my access key and I copy it. So that's the first one copied. And I go back to my code and I paste it in. So that's my username. And then I copy my other secret access code. And you should never upload these to GitHub because people wait for you to upload them and then they use them. I'm going to delete these after this, so I'm not too worried about you guys using them. And that is that. And if I go back here, I'm just going to comment that out because I don't need it. And now when I rerun my application, so I'm going to stop it and rerun it. If I've done that right, and hopefully I did, it will reload those credentials. And now when I go back, it should be up and running now. When I go back here and I click on, I don't know, the bear, and I say detect labels, if I did that right, it should be able, there we go, it worked. So it got animal 97.8, bear 97.8, and you can see the other, brown bear 86%. Now, I know that was a quick little demo, And I would hope that you found that interesting, because if you did, I actually have a camp we've just published last month, which lets you learn how to do this yourself, step by step, every bit of the code. Even if you're not an advanced programmer, you should be able to do it. And you can even upload your own images. So I'm going to upload a terrifying, scary image. What we upload? We'll upload this lady here. And did it upload? I don't know if it did. Oh, sorry. Add to image list. There she is. We'll say, what is that? And it says, it's a head, it's a person, it's a face. They're happy, they're laughing, adult, female, woman, smile, and necklace. And I think that's pretty accurate representation of that image. Now, I'll stop sharing at this point so I can see the chat again, but I think I'm out of time. I'm at 50 minutes, and we need to leave a few seconds for chat. So I'm going to stop rabbiting on there and say, that was my demo. And to answer the person who said, look, I'm a beginner, is it just data? Well, that was an example of, I could have trained a model to recognize any image. And I would have to spend years on my poor little computer, because it's not a supercomputer. It's a good computer. Yeah, it can play games, but that's about it. And I could run that model, train that model, and after weeks and years, it could recognize 3,000 different random objects. And then I feed it an image, and it would give me a probability of what was in that image. Or I could just call an API that someone else has trained, an application programmer's interface, a service, and say, hey, here's an image, what's in that? Which you saw me do. And I'm happy to teach you to do. Now you might say, but machine learning, lots of maths, data science. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't want to learn it. I just want the utility of it. It's like saying, I gave this example to a student during the week. The student said, well, in what circumstances would I use the cloud service? I know how to do this myself. I said, absolutely. Okay, I'm visiting your house. And you say, you're visiting my house. And we decide we want a pizza. I want to feed you a pizza. Well, I can have a pizza delivered to my house, or I can go buy a pizza that's pre-made and take it home. Or I can go to the supermarket and buy all the ingredients and take them home and cook them. Or I can go out to the field and start planting some crops, because I need to grow some wheat so I can start making bread. All of these are valid ways to make a pizza, but some of them are going to be quicker than others. Now, is it more expensive to have a pizza delivered? Yes. Would it be more expensive to pay someone to open my mouth and close it to chew so I don't even have to do that? Yeah, I could do that. Each step of convenience costs more money, but it's also much faster. So I will save the most amount of money by growing my own wheat, making my own bread, growing my own tomatoes, making my tomato paste, getting my own cow, milking my own cow to make cheese. But that's crazy. If you think about it, it'd be much quicker to have the food delivered to me. So again, it's more expensive, but it's quicker. Now, again, it's not just data, it's also computing power and services. I think that's me. I better answer some questions now. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, do me a favor, okay? One, ask questions here so we can have a chat. We have a few minutes left. And two, please fill in the post-event survey that your cloud captain will share. If you fill that in, my boss gets it and hopefully won't fire me. And we can do these type of events only if people turn up. And I'm quite impressed to see how many people were here today. I see 51 people here. That's amazing on a Sunday. So thank you. The second one is that feedback helps the captain and me get better at running events. So feedback on me helps me better know what is the right level to pitch events at. Am I too low? Is it too easy, too hard, whatever it is? And the same with the captain. The captain wants to know what type of events to do. And if you enjoyed this session, I'm going to ask one favor, if that's okay. I currently have a survey running, and you may have heard of this already, but if you didn't, I'm just going to drop it in here. I can't spell. It's hard to type standing up. Okay, so I've just dropped it there to everyone. If you were able to fill that in for me, if you're studying anything IT, computing related, I would really, really appreciate it. And the information is confidential. We're using it to try and figure out what's the next workshop I make for you guys. So the more people who fill it in, the better understanding I will have of what's the right level of workshop for your club. And, that would really help me. So I appreciate all the direct messages people have been sending me and any questions. I'm happy to take any questions for the last few minutes. Are there any questions from the captain, first of all? And then I'm happy to take questions from anyone.
Yes. I think there was one question regarding the pricing session or some more introduction to like generic introduction to AWS cloud. So maybe you can help us with that in future. We can plan something, and maybe we can also host some cloud quest with your help. So that will be helpful for us.
CloudQuest is a lot of fun. So yeah, I do recommend that if you like learning through gaming. That is a lot of fun.
Guys, please unmute yourself or post your question in the chat so that Stephen can
Yeah,
answer.
I'm going to look up the name of the book right now because it's around here somewhere, but I literally cannot see it. Maybe it's behind me. No, I still can't see it. I don't know where it is. It's around here somewhere. I was reading it just recently, so I don't know where I put it. I've far too many books. It's just crazy. I don't see it, but I'll get the name for you, and I'll share it with the captain. I believe the book is available in India, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Lakshya, do you want to
I
ask?
will find out. Yeah.
I think Lakshya has raised his hand. Want to ask some questions.
Go for it.
Good evening, Stephen. Thank you for conducting the session. I hope I got the name right. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
I'm currently doing this degree in data science, and I'm also working as a professional, as a software developer in a startup. And we are exploring generative AI and LLMs. And I've come to know about AWS Bedrock, which I think was launched a couple of months back. And we are exploring use cases upon how we can host LLMs, or we can access the LLMs which are hosted in AWS Bedrock, how we can uh, fine tune them and work with applications. So are there any training or certifications program which are available for AWS Bedrock? Any practitioner certifications which are going to be launched in some time? And how do we get training for that?
So yes is the answer, but I'm not actually on the certification team, so I'm not sure when they're launching or when the exams are and so on. But what I would say is the team I'm on, we do a lot of generative AI, but it's very tricky for us to do it with students. And let me explain why. Currently, Bedrock, you're in a better situation than most students because Bedrock is currently not available in hosted workshops by us or anyone. So that means if a student says, can I do a Bedrock workshop? The answer is no, not right now. So if the student says, oh, well, I've got money, well, then they can, but we don't want to do workshops where the student has to bring their own money. So that's tricky for us. Now, the fact that you're in a startup, the answer is as follows. What Bedrock lets you do is have your own code base, but instead of having to run the LLM inside your code, you can simply specify the model you want to use. Now you pay, you get as standard our own models, which are called Titan, and they can generate images and text. But if you want to use, say, Anthropic or Cohere or Meta's model, you can. They're all hosted there, but you have to opt in and pay extra for them because they're selling them through our marketplace, as opposed to going to their website. Now, the benefit is you get a single API where you send a request, you specify the model, you specify the prompt, and you get back JSON, and then you do whatever you want to do with the JSON. Now, I'll give you an example of what I do with it. When I'm writing applications and I need to test, I might write a web application that needs to test user input. So I'd have to type John Smith, fake address 1, fake address 2, fake address 3, and that's very boring. And it's not a real test. Instead, I can say, generate 10 fake users in the following format. I want 5 male names, 5 female names. They need to be all Irish surnames or whatever. And I need them to have realistic addresses. And it'll generate that data, which I can then feed in to test, is my algorithm working? So for me, it's a way to instantly have test data. And that, it seems silly, but it's really changed how I write my tests, because I can generate a really good test, because the code generation is done with Code Whisperer for me, but the input data, I want to be realistic as well. So the answer is Bedrock. There's a lot of training material coming. It is very new. A lot of the training material is currently being tested. However, I believe there will be certifications and a lot of training material coming very soon from my org. I know there's already stuff from other organizations, but my org, we're planning and building it right now. And in my team, I'm working with my colleague Curtis, who's developing a whole course on generative AI for students. And I'm working on the coding aspects as well. So stay tuned. But the fact that you're a startup, you can probably get access to this straight away, but it is all opt-in. Now, I actually usually don't even demo Bedrock to students because I hate showing them something they can't use themselves. But this is something that I think will be huge, and there will be a lot of demand for it. And as soon as we can show it to students, we will be. I hope that answers your question. In terms of an official exam, I don't know when the official exams will launch, but I would not expect it to be very long before that happens.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm just seeing what the other questions are. Is the way to implement AI with web server for better automation than generic coding way to manage things? I'm not sure, Aditya, what you mean. Could you just maybe give me slightly more details on your question? Learning path, I would start with GAWAS. I would start with Cloud Practitioner. So the Cloud Practitioner exam is very, very accessible if you are already a techie. It's kind of nearly more aimed at business folks who are learning with cloud for the first time. I would say you would find it straightforward enough with a little bit of study. And the book I mentioned from my colleague would be very good for that. If you're the type of person who likes exams, there's loads of exams. I'm not. I prefer to build things, and that's how I learn. But if you like exams, there's loads of exams that will help you build these things. And Aditya, I'm just not sure what your question is there, but I will say that you have an awesome middle name, because Kant was an amazing philosopher. So I'm quite impressed by your middle name. So please give me some more details there. And for everyone else, are there any more questions or anything anyone would like to ask? Very good. So Aditya, yes. So generative AI and cognitive AI, which are the two types. I just showed you cognitive, which is you give it something and it analyzes it. Generative AI is you give it something and it generates something new. So in terms of personalization, you can absolutely build that with both cognitive and generative AI, but it's up, we provide the service to do that. It's up for the app developers to decide what they're going to build. So for us, we would say you can have custom models. So let's say for cognitive AI, let's say you're building an app which can analyze crops, particular crop, let's say it's potato crop, and you're looking to see, is there a disease on the leaf? Now, the standard models can't do that. I mean, they're just not specialized enough. But you could build a custom model using our cloud that would then be able to do that. You could sell it or do whatever you want with it, use it in your applications. It's the same with generative AI. You could train Bedrock, which is our generative AI service. You could train it with, let's say, your own company documents, and it could then start generating new documents on your request that would be in the same style or use information from the database of documents you'd fed it. So you could also, in theory, build one which read all your text messages, all your WhatsApps and whatever else you use, and had a model like you, and then use it to answer people when you're busy doing other things. But I'm not sure that would be very ethical, to build a fake you based on your WhatsApp messages. But I suspect some people are trying to do it. But yeah, you can use our platform to build personalized AI services. Now, I see that Cloud Coder Society, which is you guys, have asked you to fill in the survey. Please do fill out the feedback survey, and if you get time, fill in my survey as well. They're separate, but they're in order to see if we can better support you with new content. Okay, and I think that's it. If there's no more questions, I was really impressed by the questions. Oh, there's two more.
I was just curious about the Party Rock service.
Yeah.
Is it still free for, or do you have to pay upfront for something?
A certain amount is free, I think. But we have a session on Tuesday you should attend as a captain about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm just going to paste it in for the people who don't know what I'm talking about. Look, Party Rock is really popular, but there's a certain amount free, and then after a while you'll be told, look, you need more credits or you need to slow down, but you can try it out and experience it. It's really hard to explain. It deserves its own session, and I recommend you do a session on it yourselves. It's amazing. How to start with cloud as a student? I would say the easiest answer is join the club and stick with it. You'll eventually see, if you're a coder, how powerful it makes you. If you're not a coder, I think you'll have to understand the cloud anyway, even if you're not coding on it. Critical differences between AWS S3 and EBS. I think that's its own session. And will there be more workshops in future? By the way, I would say as a student, just stick with S3. You don't need EBS until you're doing certain things. And then finally, would there be more workshops in future? Well, that's up to you guys. I hope so, but that's up to you. Yeah, this wasn't a workshop. Workshops are tricky because they involve you doing work with a laptop. I mean, these sessions, they're easy for you. You just watch me and ask a question if you feel like it. And I have to be the performing on stage. I'm fine with that, but I don't think you learn as much as if I say take out your laptops. You're going to need Visual Studio Code. You have to have one semester of Python before you attempt this. Those type of sessions, I think you learn a lot. So I hope we get to do some of those with you.
Okay, great. Okay. I think there are no more questions.
That's it. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, folks. And it started raining here. It was a lovely sunny day this morning, though it's very cold. But it started raining, so I don't think I'm going to go out into that rain. And I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. And thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for these insightful sessions. And thank you all students for joining this session. We'll get the link and all the joining details very soon. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.